pandemic, the most trusted voices are naturally the physicians, who appear to possess the training and experience to understand what may appear like magic and mystery to those not trained in the magical arts of medicine. And if you are not well versed in math and science, you have no choice in a pandemic but to be prepared, to be astounded and amazed. Watch wonders unseen. And just when you thought that you had survived a pandemic, just like magic, it appears like new emerging diseases are popping up every day. For the last 2 years, the top headline in the news has been disease and pandemic. Continued in descendant variants of concern such as Delta and Omicron, and now the dominance of variant BA5. And for at least a while, poultry farms were destroying chickens because of a fear of an epidemic from the avian flu variant H1N5. And now, with the latest declaration of a public health emergency of international concern, PHEIC, with leading infections in America, like with COVID-19 heavily impacting the United States from monkeypox. Some may have forgotten about the genie in a bottle that apparently either zoonotically had evolved or from an unknown source or had been cultivated in the laboratory. So we must get into to definitively determine and that had escaped. And as a coronavirus, one of the immediate associations, even for clinicians in China who had been the first on the ground to examine the new cases, found the novel coronavirus at least to resemble, in the patient's presentations, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, SARS-CoV, and according to the World Health Organization, on January 7th, 2020, the Chinese authorities identified a new type of coronavirus, novel coronavirus nCoV, which was isolated, and laboratory testing was conducted on all suspected cases identified through active case finding, trace contacts, and retrospective review, wherein other respiratory pathogens such as influenza, avian influenza, adenovirus, severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus, SARS-CoV, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, MERS-CoV, were ruled out as the cause. And many around the world identified Dr. Anthony Fauci, who had possessed more than 3 decades of experience handling HIV, SARS, MERS, Ebola, and even the nation's 2001 experience with bioterrorism, the anthrax attacks, as America's most trusted voice in pandemic. In addition to the fact that he was a doctor and should know better than anyone else about disease. And according to the Center for Disease Control, in the most updated guidance to prevent the spread of the virus, back at the beginning of the pandemic, had stated that based on what is currently known about the novel coronavirus and similar coronaviruses that cause SARS and MERS, spread from person to person with these viruses happens most frequently among close contacts within about 6 feet, which became the rationale for social distancing. And since it was published on the CDC website back in April 2020, most people probably assumed that that was simply the science, as it was at that point. The novel coronavirus that caused COVID-19 most closely resembled SARS and MERS, according to the scientists at that time. Prior coronaviruses that had caused outbreaks and that had made headline news, just like the current novel coronavirus, which has dominated headlines for over 2 years. And few, if any, people, especially in times historically associated with fear, confusion, and despair, were prompted to attempt to second guess so as to let the experts lead the way. and very few probably knew about the peculiar anomalies, particularly associated with MERS-CoV, which had first emerged on the Arabian Peninsula in 2012, and that had even caused the CDC to publish as late as August 2019, the year before the pandemic, declaration that we don't fully understand the precise ways that it spreads, that researchers studying MERS have not seen any ongoing spreading of MERS-CoV in the community, no wider community spread. But they did notice that the disease had been almost exclusively limited to nosocomial or hospital settings outbreaks, with the curious anomaly of no community spread into the places outside those hospital settings, like it was stopping at the door, almost entirely self-contained for unexplained reasons. Doctors were baffled. It was a mystery. And if you were to review the CDC website in August 2019, you would see very clearly that it was their position that infections would arise through person-to-person spread of MERS-CoV, usually after close and prolonged contact, such as caring for, living with an infected person, has been well documented. Not a casual contact disease or an opportunistic pathogen. And most importantly, most people who had close contact with someone who had MERS did not get infected or become ill. It was like they suddenly stopped being highly contagious. And that doesn't sound at all like the way that we've heard about COVID-19, the reportedly highly contagious disease, at all. So why did the medical experts at the CDC in April 2020 publish that, based on what is currently known about the novel coronavirus and similar coronaviruses that cause SARS and MERS, spread from person to person, with these viruses happens most frequently among close contacts within about 6 feet? If they had concluded that person-to-person spread of MERS-CoV usually occurred after close and prolonged contact, such as caring for or living with an infected person, that had been well documented. And most importantly, most people who had close contact with someone who had MERS within 6 feet did not get infected or become ill. Was it a typo? Did one of the genies and wizards of medicine make a mistake? Is anyone concerned that the doctors who rapidly produced a COVID-19 countermeasure product that many describe as a vaccine still did not completely understand how MERS had been transmitted and spread back in 2019? As concerning as that may be, according to the CDC, MERS, where all of the outbreaks have occurred in hospitals, and which they say had emerged on the Arabian Peninsula, was a zoonotic evolution from dromedary camel. However, many MERS case patients have no reported exposure to a prior MERS patient or a healthcare setting or to camels, meaning the source of infection is unknown for many patients. So some people outside the hospitals where the outbreaks had occurred and with no connection to infected persons appear to have just gotten MERS all by themselves, according to the CDC, or they simply cannot explain this common anomaly even today during a pandemic, almost a decade after MERS had emerged. Still a mystery, unsolved. Yet MERS becomes an even greater mystery beyond what apparently had been a stampede of dromedary camels sneaking into hospitals on the Arabian Peninsula, and later in South Korea in 2015. How they raced across a continent is simply unimaginable. By 2018, according to the Virus Medical Journal, there had not been found any case of a camel herdsman or camel jockey who would be expected to spend the most time with camels after getting this allegedly zoonotically evolved disease. Just like magic and in a genie in a bottle, they apparently had herd immunity. Camels normal herd immunity. Makes sense. But you look like an intelligent person. This briefing is unclassified. As you heard, my name is Major Mike Webb. And by God, I am running for U.S. Congress. This year, make the right choice, and we shall make America great again. Honest. Carry on.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.